Hey, happy Thursday, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, a CEO, founder of Techstrong Group, and you're watching the Techstrong Gang. If you didn't catch our inaugural Techstrong Gang episodes, the last 2 or 3 episodes, let me just quickly tell you what this is about. In addition to all the normal, regular, fantastic editorial coverage that you see from us here at Techstrong, we've now added a new element to our daily broadcast, and we call it Techstrong Gang. And in the gang, we're, various editors, reporters, folks from Techstrong are in here in our studio in Boca Raton, Florida, as well as being joined remotely from wherever our guests may be, to discuss relevant topics of the day. Some of the topics are contained on our Techstrong sites like DevOps.com and Security Boulevard, and Cloud Native now, Digital CXO, Techstrong AI, Echo Insights. And then some of it is really just, what's news out there in our world. And the idea here is to make it interactive. And then what you'll see as we continue to unfold Techstrong Gang is we'll also be bringing in friends and family of Techstrong. And between myself and Mike Vizard and Mitchell, we have quite a cast of characters who we consider friends who will be joining us and should add a lot to our show. We still will have all of our great interviews and sessions from virtual events, as well as longer form video playing throughout the day on Techstrong TV, so stay tuned for that. But for now, let's turn over to today's gang headlines. Mike, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do, because we have a subject that is near and dear to Bonnie's heart here in terms of her coverage of the environment and AI and sustainability. But there is a new bill floating through Congress that's been launched by a couple of Democrats, so it might take a while before we finally hash this thing out. But ultimately, they want the EPA to do a study on what the impact AI is going to have on the environment. There's a lot of compute horsepower that goes into this stuff, and they want the NIST folks to start voluntarily collecting data from people about what that impact is going to be, and we'll see where that goes. But Bonnie, we'd love your input here. What's your take on AI and the environment these days? How big an issue?
Well, Mike and Alan, thanks for having me. It's interesting because obviously we all know that AI takes a lot of power from computing, but even on a smaller scale, just one Google search can take the energy to light a light bulb for 17 seconds. So imagine the scale of AI and machine learning. A couple of the problems that we're seeing is the tapping into natural resources. For example, AI is known for using a lot of water in the process that it does. And that's something that I think this bill with 2 senators and 2 congressmen are looking at in order to measure the environmental impact of AI. And that is something that we've been looking at, and the government's been looking at, I would say, from an ethical standpoint, and now we're looking at it from an environmental standpoint. And there's lots of ways to do that, and I think we'll be talking about that, not just for AI, but also for DevOps, whether the carbon measurements will become a mainframe of how we measure things with DevOps and our efforts to just be environmentally friendly.
So when you say AI is using water, that's water used to generate hydroelectric kind of power sources.
Right, and we don't even know exactly how much. And I think that as we rely on computing more and more, we're going to see this impact. And I think that because it's an unknown X factor, that's one of the reasons this has to be measured.
Yeah, we see a lot of data centers in places like Iceland where they're hooked up to a hydroelectric dam that cool the data center next door.
Well, in Iceland, I think they're using geothermal. But you do see it in Sweden, Norway, and even here in North America, where they're using dams to generate hydroelectricity or hydro-powered electricity. But look, this is a similar conundrum to what you find with Bitcoin mining, right? What makes Bitcoin mining so expensive is just the pure energy consumption to crunch those numbers, and they're and this is why a lot of Bitcoin miners, they look to zombie other people's machines so that they don't have to Because if they had to pay the cost of electricity, it's dubious whether Bitcoin is worth it. And I think we're going to see this in AI. I think part of it, though, is because today's AI processes, and Mitchell, you would know this better than I guess us, but it's basically these NVIDIA GPUs, right? Mm-hmm. They're kind of the first gen AI processors. I saw articles and news reports this weekend where Sam from OpenAI, the CEO of OpenAI, is looking not as part of OpenAI per se, but looking to raise $1 trillion to create next-gen AI chips, hopefully made here in the U.S., right, which would be a big boon to industry. But part of the deal is these chips would be a lot more energy efficient. Mm-hmm. So, I think the question is, do we make them more efficient, or we just figure out how to generate more electricity, or a little of both?
Yeah, the issue is GPUs weren't designed for AI. They were designed for graphics, and so there's a lot of overhead that's not needed for AI. Mm-hmm. Mitch, I want to get your 2 cents here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Do we need sustainability to become another metric that we're tracking in DevOps and our IT management platforms? And should we be tracking how much heat is generated and what that costs? Because I feel like we kind of sit on the side here with FinOps, but it's not really present as I'm building my apps or deploying things or managing things.
Well, I think that's one of the kind of, we learned this lesson in the cloud early on and still do, is AI can be very costly to run, and you don't know right up front if you haven't been building, large language models or doing lots of data processing, data analysis that's used by machine learning. So you pretty quickly learn that it's expensive, right? And you have to partition it, use it wisely. And to Bonnie's point, it's the water and all the sustainability that goes into it to cool the chips. And I think we're at this nexus point where we're starting to see, not that it's going to be all good on the other side, but we're starting to see the next generation chips coming out of NVIDIA and Amazon and IBM. Everybody's focused on how to do more efficient, higher speed. They say we consume about, I think the next chip, HDX 200 that came out in November, or at least was announced, it's like 1.4 times. It's not the old Intel, model of doubling compute capacity every 18 months. But I think we're in this curve where we're going to be forced to, because you can't consume, even if there was enough power, it wouldn't be cheap enough for you to be able to consume what all AI applications can potentially use. So I think we've got a lot of learning. We kind of have the AI FinOps arm that needs to start, or is starting, to look at the cost.
All right. Bonnie, I know you've interviewed a lot of folks on this topic, so what are you hearing from them?
Well, it's really interesting because even though I would say most in the industry are aware that sustainability is an issue, just in general, when it would a data center the electricity it used would power 50,000 homes, for example. So we already know we're using a lot of energy, and then AI compounds the issue. So the question is, a lot of corporations are looking towards is, how do we calculate this? How much carbon are we emitting? How do we measure this? And of course, how do we control it? And I did a recent interview on Ecotech Insights with John Zhang, who's the COO of a company called Memverge. It's a software company that will measure and track carbon. But what's interesting is that his company is not the only one that's doing this. I've interviewed quite a few that are doing it. It seems that there's slow to adoption happening, where only 10% of the actual companies, I guess globally, are making these measures as part of their daily processes. So while we know it's something that should be done, it's a slow to adoption. And one of the things that John had said in the interview was that people are afraid, well, what's this going to cost me if I do this? And what they're finding is it's actually not costing them more. They're able to do better with less energy, which in the end would cost them less. So it's kind of an interesting situation now with, of course, government regulation globally also going to push for more of these emission tracking. And one other thing I just want to note is another issue that companies are having is monitoring the emissions throughout their supply chain. So you're going to have scope 3 emissions that are happening across your supply chain that you have no control over. So how do you monitor that? So there's a lot of still issues that have to be worked out as companies look towards becoming more sustainable.
Alan, what do you think? I'm wondering, do we not need, say, AI to heal itself here on the energy stuff, because we could have predictive models and LLMs that are optimized to track the usage of energy by other LLMs? So, the whole thing could become somewhat of a loop.
Watches the watchers.
Just don't put it on automatic.
Yeah.
One other comment about this too is I just, my own opinion, I'm not too optimistic about regulation by Democrats in an election year is going to go real far. Right now, it's not a bipartisan effort today. Whether that turns around, depending on the outcome of the election, all that kind of stuff. I would look more to the Europe, EU for this kind of regulation to actually have an impact. But that's, my lame prediction, as much as I know about regulation and how it flows through governments.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think, we have a tough time getting anything through here, especially in an election year. What was it? Congress had 27 laws they passed all last year or some nonsense like that. Not to get all political though, but the fact is
reality.
Yeah. The fact is, though, that the infrastructure bill that was passed early on in President Biden's administration actually set aside a lot of money for sustainability and measuring carbon in building materials, right? Because they say building materials, or the whole building industry, construction and so forth, generates as much as 40% of all the greenhouse gases that we emit here in the world. And to me, this is kind of a similar thing, right? If we put some dollars where our mouth is and incent people to be more sustainable and be more efficient in their use. I mean, this is why we started seeing the data centers being built in Iceland and Sweden and Norway and in the Arctic Circle, because you don't have to pay much for cooling down up there. You just pipe in the air. You need these incentives to make it happen.
I think you're overly cynical about our legislative process, because it kind of works like this. Basically, all 50 states will go and create their own version of these laws, and then somebody, after the presidential election, there'll be a push from the business saying, knocking on the door of the elected representatives going, idiots, we can't have 50 regulations, so now we need one. So then
I'm cynical.
And then we'll get something that looks like a national law that will probably be the least, regulatory thing from a particular Republican state that we could get some agreement on, while we, to Mitch's point, have the more stricter EU rules and whatever else is going on around the rest of the world.
But we know Mike brings balance to the cynicism, so thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Well, also on a positive note is that in the interview that I did with John Jang from Memverge, he was saying that once companies start to do this, measure and track, it can reduce data center emissions by 10%, just to begin. So if it gets going, for the ones that are doing it, it is making a difference.
All right. And there are companies doing this regardless of what the government says, because they're doing it because it's good for their image, good for their stockholders. There's even some economic incentives to do this stuff, right? So,
Absolutely.
We don't always have to wait for some government regulatory body to figure it out.
I think cost will be a big driver for it.
Yes.
It's got to get more efficient. You can't afford to do it.
Right.
Yep.
It's doubling. Compute power, they say, is in AI usage is doubling every 10 months. So that's fast.
I wanted to segue into a related topic, but I'm going to kick it to Mitch here for a minute. We've been talking about observability forever and a day in the land of DevOps, but I feel like we're starting to extend observability out to include sustainability, and we're also using it to track business metrics and equate them to IT events. I don't know if everybody knows what observability is, so maybe you want to take a crack at that to start with, but it feels like we're trying to get better at understanding IT in general, and sustainability just may be one piece of that equation.
Yeah, the simple version definition of observability is logs, alarms, and alerts. It's a lot more than that. It's really a data platform for integrating all of the sources of logs and that kind of information. But you be able to correlate that across different sources to get a full picture of what's happening in the organizations. And I think as observability has matured, it's been a big thing in security, for example, for a long, long time. Alan and I have talked to many people, you have too, Mike, about using observability. Cisco bought Splunk because it's a security tool, right? And I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting, early on, kind of learning about observability, is that you could put in there like customer experience metrics. You could put business metrics that it might measure. And I think that's what you're pointing to in some of the articles on DevOps.com also, that, now that you have all of this information about what's happening in both in the development and the operations cycle, because we're using more observability and development too, that data can be used for a lot of different purposes, saving money, sustainability, security, governance, all kinds of applications. So it is kind of everything everywhere all at once. And I think it's a pretty fundamental tool that we have today.
Yeah.
You want to jump in there a little bit? Because I know you've been watching observability for DevOps for a decade.
But here's an interesting thing. So observability has certainly caught fire the last 3-4 years, and really what's ignited it has been the cloud native movement, right? With things like OpenTelemetry and Prometheus, some of the work that the folks at Grafana Labs does. And so it's been a case of a rising tide lifting all these boats, because now we're able to actually get our head around all of this information. But observability, to Mitchell's point, has been co-opted by security. Most people think of observability as a great way to help security. But when you go back and I've been a fan of Splunk since they were giving out cool black t-shirts at conferences, right? With witty sayings on them. Splunk never held itself out to be purely security. Splunk was like rubber, or glue rather. It would collect anything and everything. And then it was up to you to decide what information you thought was valuable. It captured this much information. You may only use it for security here or application management here. But the ability to just capture information, and then, we have big data analysis, you want to call it machine learning or, AI ops or whatever. I think it could be applied to anything.
I think Gen AI is going to be a big factor in that equation, because the issue is when you go talk to people about observability is that they're like, oh, great, we got all this data. And then they go, I have no idea what question to ask. I mean, it's just this massive amount of data. But if I have Gen AI, I can get a summarization of events, and I don't really have to know so much.
I think, so the whole way the AI works with this observability and the big data set is, I make it's more akin to, you need a fission bomb to light off to ignite a fusion bomb, right? I think you can't apply Gen AI until you've had the machine learning already do its thing, and then you can use a Gen AI interface and large language module. But I think, if that's the hydrogen bomb piece of it, the traditional machine learning, AI ops as we call it, is the uranium bomb, right? That's,
all right,
you need that.
Well, before we blow up the entire world, I think we'll take a break here.
Good idea. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong Gang. We're going to be back in about 30 seconds with more great news and banter, and hopefully we won't blow the world up.
Discover the cutting-edge insights of our new show, AI Times, a series that explores the limitless potential of artificial intelligence. Sponsored by the AI Infrastructure Alliance, the AI Times is at the forefront of the AI revolution, tackling the crucial questions of how we can leverage AI for the betterment of humanity. Stay ahead of the curve as this show delves into all things surrounding AI, including trends, pressing concerns, and the positive impact AI is making around the globe. AI Times.
Hey everyone, we're back here at Techstrong Gang. I hope you enjoyed our first segments today. You know what I realized though is, I take it for granted that you all know who we are. I did a good job of introducing myself, but I didn't introduce the rest of the gang for today, and let me do that now. Joining us from Colorado is my good friend and Techstrong CTO and Principal Research Analyst at Techstrong Research, Mitch Ashley. And Mitch is here on most of the shows, so I just took it for granted. But Mitch, thanks for joining us today. On my far left, or it might be my far right, depending on whether this is mirror image or not, I guess, is Techstrong Chief Content Officer and another friend of mine for a long time, Mike Vizard. Mike, thanks for joining us. And then the new gang member today, it's her first time on Techstrong Gang, though she's been reporting here at Techstrong now for over a year, Bonnie Schneider. And Bonnie, I don't want to embarrass you, but why don't you just give people a little bit of your background?
Oh, thanks, Alan, and then hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on. My background actually is in television as a meteorologist for networks like CNN, MSNBC, and the Weather Channel, and I'm also the author of 2 books, Extreme Weather, published by Macmillan, and most recently, a book on climate change and sustainability that was published by Simon & Schuster. So now I am really focused on the impacts of climate change and how to be more sustainable in the tech world, and those are the reports that I've been filing on Ecotech Insights, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. We're excited to have you here. All right, let's move along.
Yeah, we're going to talk about cybersecurity because we typically always like to do that at least once during these shows. There's a report out from an outfit called Chainalysis. They monitor blockchain payments through illicit networks and various things that involve ransomware. And their analysis suggests that there's already been over $1 billion in ransom payments last year that we know about. There's probably more. Has this become a multi-billion-dollar industry, and what's to be done about it? Because I feel like we're having this conversation all the time, and you've been doing security for longer than anyone wants to care to admit.
Mitchell's doing it as long as I have. Don't blame just me. He's older
Don't
than
drag me down. Don't drag me into this nonsense.
Look, there's not a doubt in my mind that ransomware is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, it is. I've seen other studies where they track like small towns in Romania and places where a lot of these ransomware gangs seem to be located, and you could actually see the influx of dollars kind of making its way through the local economies there. So in one way, ransomware is, helping to take care of diversity, wealth diversity, right? And it's far from Robin Hood. But anyway, yes, it is a multi-billion-dollar look, and there's a lot of players in this, right? Number one, you got the cyber insurance companies, right? Because if you remember, there was a time when ransomware first kind of burst on, our news screens, and the advice from the government, from the U.S. government, was don't pay the ransomware. It's like negotiating with terrorists. And then we found out a lot of government agencies, local, federal, were, in fact, doing that, right? So do as I say, not as I do. Then the whole cyber insurance industry is really, what's their biggest, ransomware is their go-to coverage, right? And they're telling companies, look, don't negotiate with the ransom people, we will. Because we know every ransom gang, and we know what price points there are, and whether they're honorable enough to unencrypt us if we pay the money. And for anyone who's been involved in a lawsuit where you were represented by the insurance company, you don't have a right to say, I don't want to pay, we shouldn't pay, or we should pay. That's strictly under the domain of the insurance carrier to make a business decision. And so the business decision is often pay. And, the more you pay, the more people are going to do it, in my mind. So is it a billion-dollar industry? Yes. Who do we have to blame? Well, certainly them, the ransom gangs, right? They are, and the whole, and by the way, it's not a ransom gang. There's a whole ecosystem here. There's the people who write the software. It's the people who do the phishing. And then it's the people who gathered that information that they got phishing and used that for the next wave of attacks, right? And it used to be we're just encrypting data. Now we have ransomware DDoS. I mean,
it's a syndicate.
Yeah, there's a syndicate to it. And the more we pay, the more it's going to grow.
It's true, and they're going after the most vulnerable at hospitals and schools. And 2023 was a record of 1 billion attacking happening in these areas. And one other thing that's going to make it worse, if it hasn't already, are these deep fakes that are happening with AI, where they're recreating voices, and people are getting these calls where you think you're talking to the person that you're supposed to be talking to. And that's, unfortunately, I think that's just going to escalate with the more technology that AI has to mimic people and mimic real life situations.
Well, we discussed that last week.
Yeah.
It wasn't audio only, it was video.
Right.
Well, it's gotten crazy to the point where now they're not even bothering to launch the ransomware attack, right? They're calling up and saying, well, we won't launch the ransomware attack if you pay us beforehand. And by the way, we'll help defend you from other people launching ransomware attacks, and we'll even clean up your environment for you for a service. I mean, it's
Look,
almost
the mafia has been doing this for years.
I know. It is not
right,
much.
well, the protection rackets.
Yeah, it is almost identical now to the protection rackets they used for terrorizing small store owners back in the day.
Yeah.
They even have help desks to help you clean up the ransomware, their own ransomware. I mean, really, ransomware, it isn't just ransomware anymore. It's extortion is what this is, because they don't, used to be they would encrypt your data and you have to pay them to get the key to uncrypt it. Now we've got your data, we'll just release it. We're not encrypting it. We're not worried about that. We're not even worried about your environment. We just stole your data and we'll publish it. And there's all forms of it. So it really is just an extortion ring. And, there are instances where the FBI went after the Hive group in 2022, right?
Right.
Which is one of these extortion rings. So if the FBI is going after, rings, the ransomware rings, it's serious. And we had the Move It software, they also learned, don't try to attack one company, try attack a piece of software that every company uses. Now you've really got a market, right, to go extort money out of.
Are we ever going to get tired of this and do something about it, or is this going to be the way we're going to live for the next 40, 50 years?
I've been asking that question for 25 years. No. I mean, you know what? The whole security thing is kind of a cat and mouse game, and we're the cats, and the mice, by definition, are kind of always a step ahead, right? Tom never gets Jerry kind of thing. And, every time we think we got something from Acme that's going to get them, they come up with some other devious way of doing things.
I almost wonder if we're headed down the path of this is treated like we treat credit card loss. Right? From theft, from that, it's just a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
We're seeing the
I'm
rewards
concerned
go
that's
up
what
too.
we're doing.
Yeah.
For the State Department, FBI, they're raising the rewards to find these hackers as well. So we're definitely seeing the situation, like you said, not improving.
Well, that's how we did it back in the day, is you got informers and you got them to telling everybody else, and then you rolled everybody into a trial, and that's how you break these syndicates.
Yeah, but you didn't have the international, well, maybe you did. You had Lucky Luciano in Sicily. But, it's funny. I was on the phone with a friend of mine this morning. They were trying to sell their condo in Atlanta. And the deal got held up because the condo board is being sued, party in a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. And so the mortgage company for the new buyer said, wait a second, we don't want to be investing in a condo where the board has this big potential liability. What can you get us the information on the lawsuit? Well, the court system in Atlanta, it turns out, had a ransomware issue.
Oh.
And so they didn't have access to the court doc and the court papers, and so they weren't able. They blew their closing, and they maybe have blown the sale of the condo. So this is real world examples where stuff like that, I mean, it's worse in healthcare, right? Obviously. But even something as mundane as this, it it grinds things to a halt. Can you imagine, criminal court?
Mitch, can AI save us from ourselves here? Come on, we got all this data.
I knew you were going to take it to AI. You always do. Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly machine learning algorithms, we're going to throw whatever we can at it, right? To see what we can do to help thwart, maybe track people down faster, all of that kind of thing. I wouldn't count on AI as the panacea for ransomware, but certainly it already is part of one of the tools that we'll use, I'm sure.
You know what? The bad guys are more likely to use AI than we are.
Exactly. First ahead of us, right? Yeah, I agree, Alan.
Sounds to me like we need a sheriff to get a ransomware posse together and go after these folks, because damn it, the local law enforcement cannot do it on their own.
You need us a Matt Dillon, right?
I mean, the closest, Mitch, most of these people don't know Matt Dillon.
I know. I'm throwing it out.
Little Gunsmoke reference there by Mitchell, circa 1965. But what is heartening is we saw this with some of the bigger ransomware attacks, more in 2022, because most of these ransomware payments are done in Bitcoin. And we have seen the ability of certain agencies, in the government, who once they put their mind into wiping that Bitcoin out of someone's account, they can. And if we could do more because that's you got to take the money out of this. Because look, as in the famous words of Tom Hagen, it's just business, right? And when you could take the money out of it for these people, they'll go on to their next money-making thing.
Right.
The famous words of Cuba Gooding, show me the money.
Yeah.
And it's all related. If there wasn't ransomware attacks, the cryptocurrencies would collapse, and then we wouldn't be spending so much money on energy because those guys are crypto jacking.
Would be done, yeah.
Right.
It's all connected.
So maybe we solve one problem when we solve a bunch of other things while we're at it.
In a perfect world.
Yeah.
Perfect world.
As they say, from your mouth to God's ear, right?
Yes.
All right, take us out.
We're done?
I think so.
Well, first of all, Bonnie, thanks for joining
it's a
us for your
pleasure.
first Techstrong gang.
I
We'll
enjoyed
have
it.
you.
Great having
We'll
you.
probably be rotating. We do 3 Techstrong gangs a week, and the plan is everybody should do one at least every 2 weeks. Some of us will do more. So we'll have you on soon. And again, if any of you have any comments, thoughts that we can do better, I know we could do better. But do write us at techstronggang@techstronggroup.com, and we'd love to hear your feedback. But for now, that's going to end off here. But remember, this is just Techstrong Gang. We've got a full couple hours worth of programming, which I'll be handling immediately following this. So enjoy the rest of Techstrong TV today, and we will see you next Monday, if you catch this show, when we air it live, next Monday with another Techstrong Gang and full day of news and happenings. This is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong Group. Thanks for joining in.